Welcome to Talkin Tone, where professional musicians, engineers, producers, and techs like ourselves all get together and discuss guitar tones. Today, I have with me Carl Popek.
How you doing, Pops? Good to be here.
I'm doing great. First of all, I would like to thank you for being so gracious to spending all your time and energy and thoughts and gear. Carl's been so kind as to let us use his entire stock of guitar amps and pedals, and we really appreciate that, first of all. And I think it's going to be a very informative series of videos. We're here to help people. We're here to teach how to achieve tones, how to get a better tone from your amp in general.
It's basically taking our knowledge and just sharing it, you know?
Yeah, you're right there, and we really need to do that with tube amps. Tube amps are great. They're a great sound. I know there's a lot of replacements, good replacements out there, and that's all well and good. And a lot of kids are plugging into the computer and going, and it sounds pretty good. I guess a lot of people think it sounds great. I'm not a fan of it, but however, it is a good alternative, and I'm glad that that's available to people. But we're here to really, bring back that 70s, or it really hasn't gone away, but 70s tube amps, and that's my forte, and I know it's one of yours as well.
I mean, to me, ever since I heard the first Van Halen album and all the albums I listened to growing up, I've always was amazed by those tones.
I just posted on my Talkin Tone Facebook page, don't forget to go there, by the way, a interview with Eddie. And it was so cool, man. He's going, I never used any overdrive pedals. I in the beginning, I never used that because I had a guitar and I made the guitar work. And I was like, man, that's so cool. And I always remember a lot of people talking. And at some point, we hope to get a gentleman called Rudy Laren on. He did 6 records with Van Halen. He was Eddie's guitar tech and a good friend of mine. And he's agreed to come on. So we'll discuss all of that on a later point. But, I thought it was so cool.
I mean, Rudy's one of the guys I look up to. It's just, to me, that was the magic time. And these sounds, they're just amazing.
It's so cool. And I'm trying to do that here. And depending on what tones I can get when, I'm going to try to achieve that myself. I was a Leonard Skinner guitar tech for a while, and we didn't have any overdrive pedals, or maybe I should take that back. Huey Thomason brought an overdrive pedal once, but it was, he really didn't need it, but he had it. But Ricky never used one when I was there when Ricky Medlock. Ed King never used one. Gary certainly never used one. It was all in a guitar. We set up the guitars for certain levels. I even used controlled taper pots in the guitars, so we had a smooth linear value from 0 to 10. 3 was all about a nice clean tone, and 5 and 6 were rhythms, and then 7 to 10 was your lead. And
it was basically simplified, but it worked. Oh. And and the flexibility of what you could do with just a guitar, a volume knob, and a good amp was amazing.
And, I just want to really, really express how you should take your guitar and your cable and plug it into the amp and then get your tone. That's how you should start everything. And then layer on all your effects or your pedals or your rack gear or your Bradshaw rigs or whatever you got. That's really how you need to get your tone.
Yeah, there has to be a base where you start when you first plug in. The sound only gets better from there as you go on.
And this is very true in recording. So, you want to record a piece, so get your guitar and go out there and listen to your amp right in front of it. Don't come in the control room first and plug in and just listen to it. You may get lucky, but I got to tell you, if you go out there in that room and listen first and get it right, and then it's right from the amp. Now, not all the time are those sounds going to be correct in the control room. They're not going to. You might have to move mics around. This is the main thing I say. Now, again, you may have to vary levels and tone controls and such forth, but moving a mic is an amazing tool. Just move the mic around the speaker. You can really achieve some great results just by doing that.
Exactly. It's that philosophy of doing that old school way of moving the mic and doing that instead of we'll fix it later. because you won't get the same results.
You're not going to. And you can do a little fixing later. Don't get us wrong.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of fixing you can do. We're not going to bag anybody on that. And a lot of guys do reamping and all that kind of thing. That's all cool. But, you know, we're here to try to teach people to get the tone right from the source the first time, if at all possible. And again, it sometimes can be a struggle. And let's just talk real quick about what you got going on. You've been building some amps, and you call them 1%.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, where did you come up with the 1% part?
Well, the 1% came up. I was talking to someone, and I always liked not having a name on the amp because it was all about the sound of the amp. You know, someone plugging in and making that connection immediately with the guitar amp. Well, I was trying to explain my philosophy on when I build an amp, that there's many amps out there, many people build amps, but I tried to explain that I want to make amps that are in the 1% of all the real good amps. And that's how the name came about. You know, I said 1%, and someone said, hey, that's a great name. Why don't you use that? Which I still don't put logos on it, say 1%. It's just a philosophy and a name that I have for the amps I build.
That's totally cool. I really dig it. I remember a long time ago, I was working with Lon Cohen over in North Hollywood, and he had an idea for a 1% speaker cabinet. He wanted it to be just built like 3/4-inch birch ply, and Lon was always a really big stickler about everything was just really beefy and meaty and just going to be the best it could possibly be, so there was no rattles or hums. And I always liked that, and we never did it, and we probably should have. But now I've met you, and, you know, with our relationship and the 1% stuff, I really dig that. So let's talk about 1% amps, and in particular, this 212 amp. What was your original design idea with this?
Well, the original design idea was a low-powered Tweed Twin, and that's an amp I wanted to build, and I wanted to do it, but I wanted to do it with my own recipe and parts. So it wouldn't be exactly like a Tweed Twin. Even though the circuit's identical, all the parts I use as far as capacitors, wires, transformers, make this amp sound a little bit different than the real Tweed Twin.
Yeah, I got to tell you, you know, the 212, it blew me away. I just plugged straight in, and there it was. I mean, there was no effort really. You know, I went out there and listened, and what I heard in the room, it didn't sound anything like when I came in the control room. It was really much better. And, back to the electronics, we want to talk about, and this will be a future episode, where we get more in depth about capacitors, transformers, pots, tubes, and all the electronic things that go into an amp, and especially about restoring old amps. Mm-hmm. And we'll get more in depth in all of that in the future. But just real briefly, capacitors, transformers, we'll talk about what you like to use, if you want to touch on that real quick, and we'll go from there.
Well, as far as parts, it all depends on which amp I'm building, because different capacitors have different flavors, transformers sound different, and basically I have a certain thing that one amp I may use one part, and another amp I may use different parts. Even though they're the same values and stuff like that, it's just like what I'm trying to achieve in the end. That's how I put it all together.
Oh, that's awesome. Like I said, we'll come back and we'll do some episodes on caps and get in depth about that. But let's talk a little more about how we tracked this and what we used, and let's talk about the amp. So this particular amp has it had two inputs. It has two inputs. Let's talk about the panel a little bit. There was a bright and normal input, 1 and 2 on both of those, and a very simple variety of tonal controls and volume controls. Really, it's got a presence control, a treble, a bass, a bright volume, and a normal volume.
This amp, the brown face era, used a certain tone network, which is different than the Tweed and different than the black face. And it's pretty simple. They do interact with each other. The volume controls, it's just standard Fender.
Yeah, I got to tell you, I like again, I plugged in and something I really noticed, on the volumes where they go to 12, they don't go to 10 on this one. And we were talking about that a little while ago, and you said, well, I don't think that really happened on purpose. So you weren't trying to be like a Spinal Tap, like the over the top.
No. I think, there are chassis suppliers and part suppliers, and, like chassis, I don't sit there and hammer out chassis in my shop. That stuff's pre-built. So that one just happened to have 12 on it.
Yeah, well, I was running them about 10 and a half. Here's another thing I didn't know, and you explained to me later about the volumes interacting with each other. So I had them both at about 10 and a half. Mm-hmm. And, another point I want to make with this amp is you would never believe, people think about a Fender amp of this era and type, about that Fender twang, this isn't at all what I got. I got rock tones out of these guitars and amps, and I mean full-blown rock tones. So, again, tonal-wise, you can get a wide variety of tones from the same amp with different guitars, and maybe even the same guitar, but, definitely with different guitars. And there is a wide variety that you can achieve with one amp.
Well, with the older amps, the amp really takes on your playing technique and the type of guitar you're plugging into. The type of pickups, the output of the pickups. So you can play through the guitar amp, and it can sound a certain way, and get someone with a different guitar, with a different technique, and it sounds like a completely different amp.
Like me.
I call that transparency. It's taking what's in front of it and letting that through.
Again, with these amps, when you hear these tracks, you go, oh my God, and no overdrive. I know guys that spend a lot of money and a lot of time on trying to get these kind of tones, and I just plugged straight in. Again, I think I got lucky maybe with the choice of guitar this time. We'll talk about that in a minute, what we used and how we achieved all of this, but it just blows me away. I just like, wow, I wasn't expecting that. And my creative side, when I'm doing, these tracks, and I put up some drums and I start jamming along with it and come up with something and track it. It really, depends on the tone. Okay, back to the tones. The presence control I used this time, I had it on around 7. Bass and treble controls were about 6.5, and again on the volume about 10. So real straightforward, real simple. No frills. I was in input number 1 in the normal channel. Mm-hmm. I seem to like normal channels. I get a little more beefier tone out of them. But again, preference, guitar, all that kind of stuff. Let's talk about speakers in this one.
What's in there is the Celestial Gold Alancos.
I got to tell you, never heard them. This is my first time. Sold.
Yeah, it's a little bit different sound, but I thought it would be a nice combination. And again, it's part of my own recipe. You can use many different speakers, and that's the one I chose to go with.
That's awesome. Man, they just sound so good. I'm a big Celestian fan anyways. And again, this is another whole topic for conversation. Speakers.
Exactly.
What cabinet, what are you going after? There's just so many different speakers to choose from. Again, I'm a big Celestian guy, but I would never think that in a Fender, really. I just really never thought about putting Celestians, personally.
One lead time, I was doing a recording session, and a guitar player had a twin, but he had greenbacks in it. And when he went for a lead, it was this nice wooden tone that you couldn't get with other speakers. But it was just a good combination,
I'm a big fan of the greenback. I would have that in everything if I could. But anyways, tubes, another whole topic for conversation. In this particular amp, you're using some new old stocks?
Yeah, in my amps, personally, when I can, sometimes I'll use new old stock tubes, and I just prefer them to a lot of the new stuff. Now, the thing with new old stock tubes, it gets kind of tough because you really have to sift through a lot of them to find the good ones, you know?
Yeah, I got to tell you, though, you know, old Sylvanias and, you know, that type of new olds like GEs, they sound so great. I'm a big JJ Tesla.
I use those quite a bit. I mean, the JJs, they're good tubes, they're reliable, they sound good, you know, but they sound a little bit different. And the tubes they make today, the reason why they don't sound like the old ones is for many reasons, but the materials are even different. The way they manufacture things today, they can't use the same chemicals and all that. So technically, that's one of the reasons why they sound different.
Yeah, another whole topic for conversation, an ongoing topic.
Exactly.
We'll get into tubes. That'll probably be about another 25 episodes on tubes alone. You know, there's so much to talk about there, biasing and such forth, and tube circuitry and, you know, voltages, and there's just so many things. But we'll get to that as we go along. I just want to put up the track real quick, and let's have a little listen. I just wanted to say a little quick disclaimer for me that I'm not a real musician. I'm not even a musician. I'm a tech. So for all you guys out there that are my buddies critiquing my playing, or anyone else that wants to critique my playing, go right ahead, because I'm not a musician. I'm a tech. I've never been in a band except for a couple of crew bands. And I was just talking to an old buddy of mine, Rob Corsi. And by the way, thank you so much for hooking Rob up with me. He lost contact with me when we moved, and we're all back in touch again. But Rob was just mentioning about our crew band with Leonard Skinner. He said it's one of the best crew bands I've ever been in. And we actually played in front of a crowd one time to do a little sound check because we were short of time, and we got offered a record deal, believe it or not. So that's as close as I get to being a musician. But anyways, let's talk a little bit about the recording and what I did. On this particular amp, I used 3 mics. I used a Shure KSM-27. I used the old industry standard, the SM-57, which is almost on every guitar amp, really, I guess. And I used my new favorite mic, an SM7B, which I got to tell you, it's the same one I'm using right here as a talkback mic here, but it sounded so good. The 7B, I put it up there, man, it just was there.
Well, I mean, when I first heard the track, I got to tell you, I mean, I was surprised, because when you think of Fender amps, I thought you were going to do like maybe a Stevie Ray Vaughan or, you know, something that sounds like a Fender. The traditional Fender.
Yeah, right.
And when I heard this, I was like, wow, that's different, and it sounds great, you know?
Yeah, it's I'm a rock guy, you know, and you know, nothing against any genres of music. I like everything, you know, I like a lot of stuff, and I'm open to all kind of tones, but I'm that kind of, you know, that big ballsy sound, you know.
Well, I mean, people don't realize how many Fenders were used in heavy rock and roll.
Yeah, you know, we've been using a deluxe with Tara Cacconi out with Josh Groban. Little 210s are just killing.
Yeah, think of Rick with Cheap Trick.
Yeah,
deluxe.
Yep.
And listen to that sound. You know, it's you know, these amps, because you got a perfect balance of preamp and power tube distortion. You just get this nice grind that you don't get with these high gain amps.
Yeah. Well, don't get me wrong. I'm still a big Marshall fan. And, you know, even Rivera, I like Rivera amps. Paul Rivera Sr., one of my favorite guys, and Junior, by the way.
Yeah.
But Senior, you know, was a longtime Fender guy. And I think his Riveras on the clean channels are the best sound of Fender I've ever heard. But again, with your stuff, it blew me away. I didn't think personally I was going to come up with these tones. But again, I think part of it might have been the guitar I chose to record these.
That's a big part of it too.
This one, and you're going to be blown away with this as well. I used an Epiphone Wildcat, which most people aren't even familiar with. It's a $350 guitar. I bought at Guitar Center without a case. I walked in. I've been trying to get one. I couldn't get one for the longest time. It's got a Bigsby on it. It's got 2 Alnico dog ear pickups, which are single coil, and I thought, it's going to have like a P90 type tone, but oh my God, this thing is like massive.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big, huge tone, and think about it. That was guitar and amp. That's it.
That's it. And people are probably going to go, yeah, right, Pops, but I'm telling you, for real. And not to mention that I ran, you know, my ISO room here is a fair ways away from the control room. It's a good 35, 40 feet. So I'm running that almost 40 foot of cable out there. This particular cable, and this is another whole topic for conversation, speaker cables or, you know, guitar leads, any of that. I used a Canary GS6 cable. Most recently I prefer Megami, but the Canary is just as good, I think. You know, a lot of this, again, it's like cooking. Some people like to use more salt than pepper. As far as the recording goes, you know, the mics, I like to place mics towards the outer edge of the speaker, and I like to face them straight in. I don't do any angles or any crazy stuff like that. I use the KSM 27 and I say small room because it is a small room that I have as an ISO booth, but I kind of put that back about 4 feet. And as you can tell in the pictures, how I achieved that. But really, you know, again, move your mics around and try different positions and get different tones. And so back to the recording bit of it, I'm using a different kind of setup than most people. I have a home studio, so I don't have an elaborate SSL or a Neve or anything like that. And so far, I'm just using a Venice F series, a Midas console. It's basically a sidecar live console. I've always been a fan of the Midas consoles, the XL3 and XL4. The input section, at one time with John Hyatt for acoustic channels, we were traveling with a lunchbox full of APIs, and John decided to keep them home. And I said, oh, geez, what are we going to use every day? And I said, I came up with an idea, boxed up for us, racked up a set of 4 XL3 input modules. And so I used those on the road. And so, you know, for years with the old mono consoles, I could really get a great tone, you know, from the Midas. So that was my decision for the home studio. And I'm only inputting the channels to the Midas, and they're analog. So I'm inputting them analog to the desk, and then via Firewire recording to Pro Tools 11. And nothing on the input channels. No EQs, no compressor limiters, nothing. Straight,
so you're going flat, straight in.
Straight to tape. I do have EQ on the input section of the Midas. It's analog input. So again, this is a technique I've come up with on my own, based on previous experience. And I got to tell you, I mean, you can hear it. It sounds pretty good. And live, when I tour, I'm one of the very few guitar techs who sets his own mic. So a lot of the engineers will come up and have a glance at it, but you know, hey, Pops, you got this set for a certain way today? Nope, same as yesterday. Every day I try to make it the same. I'm the guy who moves it. Sometimes, give you for instance, when Tara Cacconi comes in, I work with a lot with Josh Groban, and I go, hey, Pops, can you check the mic? And I go, what's the matter? He goes, it sounds a little dark in this particular song we're playing today. It looks all right, but hang on a second, and I'll go back and move the mic a 1/4 inch and, eighth inch maybe. Yeah, that's it. There you go. Didn't touch any tone knobs.
Exactly. I mean, a lot of it, you go from venue to venue, and there's things that are with the venue that are out of your control, acoustics. So you can adjust for those. And, a lot of players have good ears. One little thing's different, they know about it.
Absolutely. All right, so we're going to wrap up another session of Talkin Tone. And again, Carl, thank you so much for coming by today.
Thanks, Pops, for having me here. Pleasure.